I almost didn't stop. The parking lot at Ridgeview Care Center smelled like cut grass and exhaust, and I was already running 15 minutes late to meet my coworker across town. I had only swung by to drop off some magazines for Mrs. Calloway, a woman from my old church who had broken her hip in February. That was supposed to take 5 minutes. Walk in, hand them over, walk out. But I took the wrong hallway, the east wing instead of the west, and that's when I saw him. He was sitting in a wheelchair just inside the doorway of room 114, facing the window. The afternoon light came in at a low angle and caught the side of his face, and for a second I thought I was imagining it. My ex-husband's grandfather. A man I had last seen at a holiday dinner 4 years ago, sharp and straight-backed, making jokes about the gravy being too thin. His name was Howard Keating, and he looked like someone had simply set him down in that chair and forgotten to come back. My name is June Whitmore. I am 31 years old, and I was divorced from his grandson Craig 3 years ago after a marriage that lasted 18 months and ended the way most bad decisions do. Quietly, with paperwork and a lease I had to break early. I did not leave on good terms with Craig's family. His mother, Vanessa, made sure of that. But Howard had always been different. He used to slip me butterscotch candies at family dinners and ask about my work with the sincerity of someone who actually wanted to know. He was the only one in that family who ever asked me follow-up questions. I should have kept walking. I know that. Every rational part of me said to keep walking. Instead, I stood in the doorway and looked at him, and he turned his head like he'd heard something, and his eyes found me. He didn't say my name the way you greet someone you expected to see. He said it the way you say the name of something you're not sure you still have. June? I stepped inside. Up close he was smaller than I remembered. His hands rested loosely in his lap, and the skin over his knuckles was thin as paper. There was a half-eaten cup of applesauce on the tray beside him, the plastic spoon still in it, and nothing else. No photographs on the windowsill, no cards on the narrow dresser. The bulletin board above the bed had a single laminated sheet. Emergency contacts, and the name listed at the top was Craig Keating. I pulled the visitor's chair close and sat down. He watched me settle in with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not confusion exactly, more like he was deciding whether to trust what he was seeing. "Does anyone come to visit?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice light. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Craig comes when he has something to bring me. Papers mostly." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. We sat together for a while in the kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable, just heavy, like something large was resting between us that neither of us was ready to name. Before I left, I told him I'd come back next week. I don't know why I said it. It came out before I made a decision. He looked at me and said, "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said, and I came back. The second visit he didn't recognize me at first. He called me Patricia and then caught himself and got embarrassed, and I told him it was fine, it didn't matter. I brought him a small bag of those butterscotch candies, and that seemed to help him find his footing. By the end of the hour he knew exactly who I was. He told me about a fishing trip he had taken in 1987 somewhere in Montana with his brother, the way the cold came in off the water in the morning, the size of the trout they didn't catch. He laughed telling it. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in years. I came back the third week and the fourth. Sometimes he was sharp and clear, tracking every word. Other times the fog was thick and he drifted between decades, called me by other names, reached for threads of memory that kept slipping. I sat with him through all of it. I talked about small things, my drive over, a book I was reading, the weather, the mediocre coffee from the machine near the elevator that tasted like cardboard soaked in brown water. He seemed to like being talked to more than he liked being talked at. I learned the difference. It was on a Tuesday in early April when everything changed. I had arrived a little earlier than usual, and he was already awake, sitting up straighter than normal, his eyes clear and fixed on the window with an alertness that stopped me in the doorway. He heard me come in and turned, and what I saw on his face was not confusion or the soft blankness of a man lost in the past, it was urgency. "June," he said, "sit down, close the door." I did both. He waited until I was seated, then he leaned forward as far as he could and dropped his voice to something just above a whisper. "They're trying to take the house." I kept my expression still. What house? His. The house on Meridian Drive. The one he had bought with his wife in 1971 and lived in for 52 years. The one she had died in. He had told me about it once. The back porch, the garden she kept, the oak tree they planted when Craig's father was born. Craig's been coming here with his mother, he said. Not to visit, to get me to sign things. I didn't understand what they were at first. I'm not, he paused, pressed his lips together. I'm not always clear, I know that. But I'm clear right now. And I'm telling you, they want me to sign the house over to them before I understand what I'm doing. I felt something drop in my chest. Why would they do that? I asked carefully. He looked at me like the answer was obvious. Because if I go first and I don't have a plan of my own, the house goes through probate. Craig doesn't want to wait. He never was patient. And Vanessa, he stopped, shook his head. She's been telling him for years that I should sell. That the house is just sitting there wasting value. She wants the money. Have you talked to anyone, a lawyer? He sank back a little. I had a lawyer, long time ago, did a will, the whole thing. But Craig said it was outdated. Said I needed new documents. Said the old ones didn't account for, he faltered. I don't remember what he said they didn't account for. I should remember. I wrote it down somewhere and then I couldn't find it. He looked at his hands like they'd let him down. Don't sign anything, I said. Not until you talk to someone who works for you. Not Craig, not Vanessa. Someone who works for you. He looked at me steadily. Will you help me? I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel and the radio off. I had no reason to get involved. I had been divorced from Craig for 3 years. Howard was not my family, not legally, not in any way that would hold up in a conversation. Vanessa had made it clear at the end that I was not welcome in their lives. Craig had echoed it without bothering to use his own words, but Howard had looked at me and asked for help. And the thing about that was, I had sat with him for 6 weeks. I had brought him butterscotch candies and listened to the fishing story twice, and held his hand the afternoon he thought his wife was still alive, and asked me why she hadn't come to see him. I had been his only visitor, and the people who were supposed to love him were using his confusion as a tool. I pulled into my parking space and sat in the dark for a long time. Then I went inside and started making calls. A friend from college had gone to law school and now worked at a firm that handled estate planning and elder law. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year, but she picked up on the third ring, and when I explained the situation, she went quiet in a way that told me it wasn't the first time she'd heard a story like this. This happens more than people think, she said. It has a name: financial elder abuse. And if what you're describing is accurate, cognitively impaired person being pressured to sign over property, that's a serious problem. What can be done? First thing is to find out what they've already had him sign, she said, and whether any of it is legally valid given his cognitive state. Do you know if he has a diagnosis? He mentioned he forgets things. A nurse once told me he has good days and bad days. I don't know if there's a formal diagnosis. That matters, she said. A lot. If he's been evaluated and has documented cognitive decline, any document signed without proper capacity assessment could be challengeable. The key is acting before they get what they want. She gave me the name of an elder law attorney in town, a man who did this work specifically and had, in her words, seen every version of this story and had a very good win record. I called him the next morning. The following Tuesday, I arrived at Ridgeview 20 minutes before my usual time. I walked past the front desk with a smile and turned down the east corridor toward room 114. The door was partway open. I heard Craig's voice before I reached it, low, controlled, the tone he used when he wanted something and was pretending he didn't. It's just a transfer, Dad. The attorney said it straightforward. You signed today, we handle the rest, and you don't have to think about it anymore. I stopped walking. Vanessa's voice, clipped and bright the way it always was, when she was performing patients she didn't actually have. The house is just sitting there. It's not doing anyone any good. Craig can manage it for you. Isn't that better? Howard's voice, slower, quieter. What happens to it after, Craig? We take care of it. That's what family is for. A pause. Howard, and what do I sign exactly? The sound of papers shuffling. I pushed the door open. All 3 of them turned. Craig's face went through surprise and then something harder and colder in about 2 seconds flat. Vanessa's expression didn't change because she'd trained it not to. June, Craig said. What are you doing here? Visiting, I said. I stepped into the room and looked at Howard. He was looking back at me, and what I saw in his eyes was relief so immediate and so naked that it almost undid me right there. This doesn't concern you, Craig said. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. I looked at the papers in his hand. What is he signing? A property transfer. It's a family matter. Is it witnessed? I asked. Is there a notary present? Vanessa laughed, short and dismissive. What is this? Craig, I said, keeping my voice even, if your grandfather signs anything without an independent cognitive assessment, it can be challenged in court. I think you know that. The room got very quiet. He's fine, Vanessa said. He's perfectly lucid. Then you won't mind waiting until he's had a chance to speak with his own attorney. Craig took a step toward me. You're not part of this family anymore. You haven't been for 3 years. Whatever you think you're doing. I'm not doing anything yet, I said. I stepped slightly to the side so I was standing closer to Howard. I just came to visit my friend. Howard's hand found my wrist and held it. Not hard, just steady. Craig looked at his grandfather. Dad, you trust me, right? Howard didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the papers. Then he let go of my wrist, folded his hands in his lap and said, I'd like to think about it. Vanessa's composure cracked at the edges. Howard, we drove 45 minutes to be here. Craig's voice went sharp. This was supposed to be simple. Howard looked up at him calmly. Most things are. Until they're not. I told them I would see them out. Craig didn't move. Vanessa picked up her purse from the chair by the door and left without another word. Craig stood for another moment, looking at Howard with an expression that was hard to name, anger, or something closer to frustration that things hadn't gone the way they were supposed to. Then he looked at me, and his voice dropped low enough that only I could hear it. You're making a mistake getting involved in this. I looked back at him. He's alone here, Craig. He's been alone here for months. Someone should be making a mistake for him. He left. Howard and I sat in the quiet for a few minutes after. He didn't ask me who I had called or what I was planning. He just reached over and picked up one of the butterscotch candies from the bag on his tray and unwrapped it carefully and put it in his mouth. Finally he said, That's been building for a while. I know, I said. He nodded slowly. Thank you for opening the door. 2 days later I brought the elder law attorney to meet Howard. His name was Mr. Fielding. I almost used a different attorney, but I want to be accurate. And he was a quiet, methodical man who wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck and spoke to Howard like he was speaking to a peer. Not a patient, not a confused old man. A peer. He asked Howard clear questions about the property, about what he understood, about what he wanted. Howard answered all of them. Not perfectly, not without pausing sometimes to find a word, but coherently, specifically, with a kind of determination that I recognized as the man I had first known. At the end of the meeting, Mr. Fielding said he would recommend a formal capacity assessment to create a legal record, and that Howard's existing will should be reviewed to determine whether it still reflected his actual wishes. Howard asked if he could make changes to it. Yes, Mr. Fielding said. Absolutely. Howard nodded. Good. I have a few things I'd like to change. The days that followed were complicated in ways I wasn't fully prepared for. Mr. Fielding filed the appropriate paperwork to flag the attempted property transfer. The nursing home social worker was notified and added notes to Howard's file. A formal cognitive evaluation was scheduled and completed. The results showed mild to moderate decline, which meant that any documents signed without proper oversight and witnessing would be legally suspect. Craig called me twice. I didn't answer either time. Vanessa called once, from an unknown number, which I only picked up because I thought it might be someone from the care center. She didn't raise her voice. She never did. She just said, very precisely, that I was interfering in a family matter, that I had no legal standing, and that if I continued I would regret it. I told her I'd keep that in mind and ended the call. What I did not tell her was that Howard had already met with Mr. Fielding twice more, or that he'd had a very specific conversation about what he wanted to happen to the house on Meridian Drive, and to the small investment account that Craig apparently didn't know still existed. The morning Craig showed up alone. No Vanessa, no papers, just him in a jacket that looked like he'd put it on in a hurry. I happened to be walking in from the parking lot at the same time. He stopped when he saw me. His expression was different this time. The controlled version of him had slipped. You had no right, he said. I kept walking toward the door. He followed. You know what the house is worth now? You have any idea what it costs to maintain a property like that when nobody's living in it? I stopped and turned around. He's alive, Craig, I said. He's not gone. You can't just... I stopped, steadied myself. You cannot decide that what's his is already yours while he's still sitting in that room. He looked away. His jaw was working, like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. He was always going to leave it to me eventually, he said, and his voice came out smaller than I think he meant it to. Maybe, I said, but that was his choice to make, not yours. We stood there for a moment in the gray morning light. Then I went inside. Howard was awake and dressed when I got to his room, sitting in the chair by the window with his hands folded in his lap and his back straighter than it had been in weeks. He looked up when I came in, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen before, a kind of settledness. Like something had finally been decided and he was at peace with the decision. He told me Craig had called him that morning before visiting ours. What did he say? I asked. Howard's mouth curved slightly. He asked me to reconsider, and I told him I already had. Very carefully and with help I sat down. We were quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the front pocket of his cardigan and pulled out an envelope. White, sealed, his name written on the front in a handwriting that was familiar and careful and clearly his. I made some changes last week, he said, to the will. And a few other things. He held the envelope out to me. I want you to have this, not to open now, just to keep safe. Howard, I started. He shook his head gently. I've been sitting in this room for 9 months, he said. And in 9 months, one person came and sat with me and talked to me like I still mattered. He paused. I don't take that lightly. I took the envelope. My hands were not entirely steady. It's not the house, he said, reading something in my expression. I know you didn't come here for that. It's a letter. And some instructions about what I'd like, if things get harder. Who I'd want making decisions. He looked at me steadily. I trust you more than I trust the people who are supposed to be mine. That was the thing that got me. Not the envelope, not whatever was inside it, just that sentence. Spoken quietly by an 81-year-old man who had been placed in a room and left there, who had eaten applesauce alone and watched the parking lot from his window and waited for someone to come back. I cried on the way to my car, not prettily, not in a way I could control. I sat in the parking lot for a good 10 minutes with my hands over my face and let it happen. What was in the envelope, when I finally opened it at home that night, was a letter. 3 pages in his careful, slightly uneven handwriting, telling me what had been done and why. He had named me his healthcare proxy, the person who would speak for him if he could no longer speak for himself. He had reviewed his will with Mr. Fielding and adjusted the distribution to reflect, as he put it, what he actually wanted now, rather than what he had written down 15 years ago, when he assumed things about his family that turned out not to be true. The house on Meridian Drive he left to a local land trust, with instructions that it be maintained as a community green space, the oak tree included. The investment account, the one Craig didn't know about, worth slightly over $40,000. He divided between a hospice foundation and the nursing home's activity fund, with a small portion set aside for my name and a note that said simply, "For the butterscotch." And for coming back. Craig contested the changes. Of course he did. He hired his own attorney and claimed undue influence and submitted paperwork and made it complicated and slow. He did not win. The capacity assessment showed that Howard had been fully competent at the time of the revisions. Mr. Fielding had documented everything meticulously. The dates, the witnesses, the 2 separate sessions to ensure consistency. The judge reviewing the challenge found no basis to overturn the changes. Howard is still at Ridgeview. He's not getting better, that was never the point. But he has a plant now on the windowsill, a small succulent I brought him on a Tuesday in May. He has photographs on the dresser, his wife at a beach in the 70s, smiling into the sun. A fishing trip from 1987, Montana, cold water and bad luck and his brother laughing beside him. I come every week, sometimes twice. He doesn't always know my name when I walk in. Some days he calls me Patricia or thinks I'm someone from his church, or just blinks at me with polite uncertainty until something shifts and his eyes clear and he says, "Oh, there you are," and every time he says it, it sounds exactly like what he means. "There you are, you came back." I always tell him I'm here.